Hello, welcome to the last my Jericho of 2020, the last one before Christmas. There's plenty more coming up. This is the 35th one we've done this year. 35 my Jerichos, week after week, every Wednesday. Thank you for sticking with us. The audiences vary from 50 to 3,000. They're all on YouTube, so if you miss it, go to YouTube, you'll find them all there. So today, it's about the biggest building project in Jericho since Wavadny. There's a huge hole in the middle of the Radcliffe Observatory Quarter to be filled. Currently, it's filled with essentially a car park. The university has bold plans for the new Humanities building, including a new auditorium and concert hall, and much, much more. So this afternoon, let's have a sneak preview with Professor Karen O'Brien, the head of Humanities Oxford, and Stephen Senskall of Carter Jonas, what it's going to look like, and what it's going to involve. Over to you, Karen.
Thank you very much, John, for inviting me. I'm really delighted to be here and delighted to be able to talk a little bit about the building project that we have, as you say, in that giant hole where the Radcliffe Infirmary Hospital used to have all of its outbuildings. As you say, my name is Karen O'Brien. I'm the head of Humanities at Oxford, and I'm also a professor in the English faculty. And I'm also a very, very long-term resident of Oxford City. I'm a local person. I lived for a number of years in St Bernard's Road, so I was part of the Walton Manor crew, and I attended the Radcliffe Infirmary Hospital when it was a hospital, and it's been amazing to be part of this journey just personally towards building this new building for the humanities on the site. What I'm going to do is say a little bit about why the building project has developed and what we as a university want to do with the building. And then I've got a few slides to share just to talk through how we think the project's going to develop and the kind of impacts that it's going to have on the area. And I sincerely believe and feel that those impacts will be very positive, and that this is a building that is not only for the university, but for the wider city, the community, tourists, visitors, and something that will enhance our local environment. So it's a very long-held aspiration for humanities at Oxford University that we have a building that brings us all together in one site, because as you probably know, the 10 departments of the Humanities division are scattered all over the city in accommodation of quite variable quality. And yet increasingly, we work together, we collaborate, we produce interdisciplinary research. Our students want to get to know each other, and we share a lot of the research that we do with school children, with publics, with a whole variety of people. And we work in a quite different way from the way that we would have worked back at the beginning of humanities nearly 1,000 years ago. So this building is really a symbol of how we want to work in the future and where we think we have come to. And when the Radcliffe Infirmary site was cleared, the university made a commitment to allocate a very large part of that plot to humanities. The plan for the building that we have includes a library, because a lot of our departments have libraries as part of their departmental space, including my own. The English faculty down near St Cat's has a library next door, and we're going to be moving most of those libraries together to create one beautiful library on the site as well. So it's an academic and library building, but it's so much more, because we are going to include within the building some public facing and performance facilities, most importantly, including a 500-seat concert hall. I'm sure you'll all agree that this is something that Oxford really lacks. We have the Sheldonian, which is large and uncomfortable and acoustically not brilliant, but wonderful for certain kinds of concerts. And we have a lot of smaller concert venues, but what Oxford really lacks is a very high quality concert hall at the 500-seat range. And that is a very key part of the planning for the building. We're also planning to have a lovely cafe, which will spill over into the outside. We're planning to have an exhibition space. We're planning to have a drama space for student drama and some visiting drama companies. And we're planning to have a black box experimental performance lab for different kinds of musical experimentation and performance. And above all, what we're planning is that the building should be fully open, and we genuinely think that this building will have succeeded if everybody who cuts through the site, people who walk past, people who come to the city, feel that they can go in without having to ask themselves the question, is this building open to me? And we are very much designing with that in view. Some time ago, a year and a half ago, we appointed Hopkins Architects to be our architects to design the building. And more recently, we've appointed Gillespie's to do the landscape design around the building. And the landscaping around the building is a very important part of our thinking. You may know Gillespie's because they were involved in the Westgate site, and we've just started working with them, and you'll see that on the boards, to think about how we create very nice public open outdoor spaces at the north end of the building near the Radcliffe Observatory, and at the south end of the building near the Blavatnik School of Government and the Somerville residences. So we have a emerging vision for the site. We're still at quite an early stage, and very recently, as many of you will have seen, we had our first public consultation. It closed just a few days ago. We had a lot of feedback, a lot of visits to the website. Sadly, in these COVID times, we weren't able to have the face-to-face meetings and displays that we would normally have had, but we did create a virtual site, and we did mail everybody in the Jericho area. And that consultation is closed, and we're going to think very carefully about the feedback that we've had from our neighbours and from other stakeholders in the city. And then we'll have a further public consultation in the late spring when our plans are further developed. And clearly we're in dialogue with the City Council, and we'll be going forward for planning permission, we hope, sometime towards the end of this year, or in the early winter, late autumn, something like that, depending on how things go. So that's where the project is. I thought you might be interested if many of you will have seen these boards before, but I'm going to put up on the screen just some of the boards from the public consultation and just say a few words about our thinking and elaborate a little bit, and then be very happy to take questions. So you will have seen this before. This is an aerial view of the site, and it is enormous. And the red boundary you see is the boundary for our curtilage for the Humanities building. The Humanities building will sit within that boundary, but clearly only occupy a part of that general scope. And you can see the Maths building to the east and the Blavatnik to the south. And obviously the wonderful Radcliffe Observatory to the north. And there are some pictures of those pre-existing buildings. At the moment, as you know, it's the early alert COVID testing site for the university, and it's also become an emergency car park, but it'll be something very different in a few years' time. And we hope that the building will be finished and opened at the latest during 2025. So if we could have the next slide. So this is a little bit of the history. I particularly remember the third picture along on the top row there, the Radcliffe Infirmary, when none of us were even aware that there was an observatory on the site. It was so well hidden by all those hospital outbuildings, and it had become a very cluttered site. And that really continued until the university acquired and bought the site back in the early 2000s. So an overview of the history of the site. We've been going back to some very interesting pictures from the late 18th century, looking at the observatory in the days when it was really in an out-of-town location, and obviously while it was operating as an observatory, which it did until the 1930s. And it was, at the time, surrounded by quite a nice green landscape. And part of our vision is to reinstate some of that green, publicly open landscape around the observatory so that people can walk through between the Woodstock Road and Walton Street, and they can really see the observatory set in its original surroundings. And so we've both taken negative inspiration from the way that the hospital filled up the site, although the hospital did very important work in other respects, of course it did, but also positive inspiration from that original late 18th century situating of the observatory in a green zone in this part of the city. So if I could just have the next slide. Actually, we'll skip over that one. That's the architect's drawing. And then here we've got some preliminary work that Gillespie's, our landscape architects, have been executing. They're thinking about the ways in which we are going to create cycling and pedestrian access routes to the site. And then if you look at the top row of black and white drawings there, on the far right, what you see is two identified zones for outdoor spaces, one to the north of the building, which will be in the middle there, and the other to the south. We think they'll have a slightly different character. We certainly think that the one to the north should be green and should be only minimally traversed by traffic, and the one to the south might be a little bit livelier with cafe overspill space and will connect through to the to Walton Street around the side of the Blavatnik. But that's, I have to emphasize that this is a very embryonic, very early stage way of thinking about the site. It is not going to be a site that has cars going across it in any number. We have to provide some disabled parking. We'll have to provide some vehicle access for probably electric vehicles to deliver books to the library and to deliver catering to the cafe. We'll have to provide for refuse trucks, and we'll have to provide for some deliveries to the concert hall. But we do not anticipate that this building will add very significantly to the traffic around this area, and it's certainly not going to be an area that has parking over and above disabled parking. But what will be really important will be cycle parking, cycle routes, and obviously very good and very legible pedestrian access. And some of that traffic is pre-existing, so there clearly are routes for refuse, for example, around the site. We're also very mindful, and we're not going to take a view about this, but there is obviously an ongoing uncertainty about Walton Street and whether it remains closed to traffic or whether it's reopened. But our planning is on the basis that we would need to reckon on using the Woodstock Road as our point of access to the site, because that's obviously the biggest access route and the one that's already currently in use for the maths building and for other parts of the site. I think the other thing to say is that we're in very regular dialogue with our neighbours, with Green Templeton College, Somerville College, the maths building, Blavatnik. We're very mindful that this building has to pull the site together in a coherent way and work for everybody, our immediate neighbours and our further afield neighbours in Jericho. So if we could have the next slide. Again, very much in development, because we're at REBA stage 2, which means that we're working on a massing and indicative design for the building. But we're all very aware as Oxford residents that views matter in Oxford, and that there are identified important viewpoints agreed with the City Council some years ago that we will have to consider when developing the building. We do not plan for the building in the main to breach the Carfax height, so that the planning that we have is for a single building located in the middle of the site that will not be higher than the Carfax height, other than we are considering some detailing, a roof feature or something that may go higher than that. We haven't made that decision. We know that's a planning consent issue, and we know that has to be a dialogue with the city and with the residents, but we're not proposing the overall massing of the building, not proposing that it would be higher than the Carfax height. And obviously, as that design develops with our architects, we need to stand at the various vantage points, Boars Hill, Port Meadow, Rose Hill, and so on, and really consider what the building brings to the skyline of Oxford, as well as what it, as well as any potential impacts, negative or positive. So very much in development, but very mindful that, this is a city that's all about the skyline, and we want to enhance rather than detract from those views. If we could have the final slide. A really important point that I want to make is that from the outset, we are very serious about sustainable design for this building. It's because it's a single building, it will be quite efficient in terms of its energy use. When you think of all the different buildings that Humanities are currently in, we're certainly going to reduce our carbon footprint as a group of departments by consolidating into one building. But much more ambitiously than that, this will be the first large Oxford University building, along with the Life and Mind building on South Parks Road, to be designed to Passive House sustainable design principles. And that means reducing, as far as possible, mechanical ventilation. That means reducing the carbon emissions of the building, thinking very carefully about embodied carbon within the building, thinking about waste management, water management, all of those kind of things. So at this very early stage of the project, we have Passive House consultants. We're thinking very carefully about our energy footprint, but we're also thinking about the requirements that we now have, statutory requirements, very good statutory requirements for biodiversity gain in the vicinity of the building. So when you build a building, there are quite a lot of living things around the building, but I wander around and it doesn't look very lively to me at the moment. When we get to the end of this project, we should have added to the biodiversity of the neighborhood. There should be significant increase in flora and fauna and in the kinds of habitats that our landscaping and our buildings support and enable. So again, it's wonderful to be part of Oxford University with phenomenal expertise in all of these areas of sustainability and biodiversity. And in addition to our consultants, we can draw upon world-class academics who are advising us and thinking about that aspect of the project, so that we end up with a range of interesting and diverse habitats around the building when we complete the project. So that's for us and for our student community in particular, a very, very important part of the building project. So I'm sharing this with you at an early stage, and you'll appreciate that we can't say too much because we don't know for certain what the building is going to look like. What we have said, and this won't change, is that in terms of the materiality of the building, we do anticipate that it will be a combination of stone and brick. So it's not going to be glass and steel. It's going to be a stone building. It's going to be respectful of, but at a slightly respectful distance from, the Radcliffe Observatory, and we think in harmony with that building and with the surroundings. And I know it's a very subjective term, but I want it to be a really beautiful building, and it will have to be functional, but it also has to be a building that people think, or at least I hope a majority of people will think when they see it, is a beautiful building as well. So I'll stop there, John. And
okay, thanks, Carol. So what's the timetable? You've had consultation. You might tell us how that went. When are you going to plan in? When is it going to start building? When is it going to finish building?
So the consultation, we're processing all the feedback, but honestly, it was very positive feedback. We had a lot of very positive comments about our aspiration to include public amenities within the building. I think in terms of the local neighbourhood, that should be a very positive message. We certainly got very positive feedback about the landscaping plans. We got the usual questions about height and massing and what's the building going to look like. And I think a lot of people are feeling that they need to wait until we can share more to really understand what this building is going to mean for the neighbourhood more generally. So that consultation is closed. We will continue the design development work after Christmas. We are doing it all online, as you can imagine. Luckily, we're not actually building the building at the moment, but we're doing as much as we can online. And we anticipate the next stage of the public consultation being in the late spring, early summer. We hope to go forward for planning consent in the probably the early autumn, or certainly the early winter at the latest. That just depends on how things go. We're clearly having a lot of engagements with statutory consultees, Heritage, Historic England, that kind of thing at the moment. And then depending on when the spades go in the ground, we'd like to open by 2025.
Okay, so how much disruption will there be in the building of it? Will there be huge lorries coming down Walton Street, coming down Woodstock Road?
I don't think there'll be huge lorries coming down Walton Street. I think the access point will be on Woodstock Road, and we'll have to think very carefully about site strategy during the building works. I think it's inevitable that there'll be some disruption, but we'll have to think very carefully about hours of working and minimizing out of hours working. But as you know, John, it's a very self-contained site, and it's a very large site. And even when we finish building the building, there'll be chunks of it that will be quite empty. So I'm confident that we can build this building with a minimum of disruption on the Walton Street side of the plot.
When are you in a position to share the plans, the architect's plans with us, do you think?
In the context of the public consultation.
So next spring, so next March or April?
Probably a little bit later than that, yes.
How is it going to tie in with the other big building of Vadnik next to it? Because that is a totally signature building. How are you going to not overawe it or not pull away from it?
Well, we've been in dialogue with the Blavatnik. I think one way that we agree with Blavatnik that it could tie in if we get this right is really thinking about that route through from Walton Street across that hard surface around the Blavatnik and into a space that we will create that could be shared between our two communities and the community more generally. So I think the tie-in will be quite a challenge for Gillespie's in terms of, thoughtful and careful landscaping, so that we move from quite sort of separate zones, as it were, that there's a sort of Blavatnik zone at the moment that ends at the end of their site boundary, and the zone that will become our zone. And then also, I think, very mindful that, as you probably know, Somerville College have a residential block at that end of the south. And so we have to be sure that we do this in a way that minimises disruption to the students who live there, but actually also offers them something pleasant and interesting to look out on and to join in with.
Interesting you mentioned the idea of a community cafe, because Blavatnik Cafe is actually open to everybody in Jericho. People don't know that. Will yours be open to everybody in Jericho?
It certainly will be open to everyone in Jericho. We're not planning to have, rather like the mass building, we're planning to have doors that are open during the day.
A question from Councillor James Fry, who's one of your local councillors. A very ugly Gibson building, which is not part of your site. Any plans for that?
In the works. It is ugly, and my poor faculty of theology and religion are currently located there, so they will be coming out of that building into surroundings that are much more worthy of the work that they do. And the university has some strategic work to decide what to do with the Gibson and Harkness site and buildings in the medium term. But the first thing to do is to get key academic functions out of there before we can make decisions. So this is a step on that journey.
So once they're vacated, they may be knocked down and something else come up in its place, or is that above your pay grade?
I couldn't say, but I think everybody in the university recognises that we need a plan for those not very attractive buildings.
Let's talk about the concert hall. Is it 500 seats, 1,000 seats, and you've appointed acoustic experts and everything else? Will that be totally open to the public as well?
It will. It is to function as a concert venue like any other. We're thinking 500 seats, something like that, because Sheldonian is 750. So we've got a big venue in the city, but this sort of medium size is something that we don't have. We had a really big international search for the best acoustician that we could find, and appointed Arup about a couple of months ago, 3 or 4 months ago, with their lead acoustician, Ian Knowles, who has built a number of award-winning concert venues in the UK and elsewhere. So we've started that acoustic design process with Arups. It's going to be a box-in-box kind of performance venue. We're hoping to have fabulous concerts open to the public. We will connect some of those concerts to our music faculty and to the research that we do, but we'll also connect those concerts to the many wonderful musical activities that take place in the city. And we've already started through something we're calling the Humanities Cultural Programme, a programme of funding and activities which are developing ways of working with cultural partners with the city. So
will that concert hall be open from day one? Is that the plan? Is it underground or is it ground level?
It is. It's partly, you have to, it'll almost certainly be partly in the basement. We're thinking of a staircase where you have to go down to a foyer to go into the concert hall. But I have to emphasize that that's a design under development, but a very big venue like that, generally you try and at least get some of it into the basement, but it will be open to the public.
So if I wanted to put on a concert by the Jericho Singers, the well-known local choir, how would I do that there?
The way that we're imagining this is that you would contact the director of the Humanities Cultural Programme. We currently have a Professor Wes Williams, who is that director. He's the director of that programme and of the Oxford Centre for Research in the Humanities. We have, if you go to their website, you'll see that we have some funding available already for groups like the Jericho Singers to work with us in the university. And although clearly we don't have the venues yet, we have already been doing virtually and want to do in person a number of cultural events, so that we develop ways of working and ways of programming and thinking about the venue well in advance of the building opens, so that, John, to your earlier question, when it opens on day one, we need to open with a fantastic set of concerts rather than open and then figure out what we're going to do.
How do you see your relationship to Jericho?
Well, I personally a very close one from many years of living in the neighbourhood.
Of course, living in suburban, the M1 of Jericho.
Close friends and neighbours.
Yeah.
I do think that view down to the St Barnabas Church Tower is important. I spent some time wandering up and down Morton Street looking at the wall. So there's actually a beautiful stone wall, which I think I've wandered past and not looked at very much, but I've really been thinking about the wall and then the holes in that wall as part of that boundary. But I think we need to, the way that I think about this is it's a relationship between people, but it's also a spatial relationship, which in the city of Oxford has tended to be very vertical, very north-south, whereas the east-west axis is the one that I think this site could really help us all redevelop. So it's a short distance from Jericho to Walton Street to Woodstock Road to Banbury Road, but I think we need to really develop that sense of a cut through, of an axis, of a convening space that pulls us all along that axis.
Do you see that therefore there being sort of a vibrant nightlife, evening life around the building?
I'd like to think sometimes. I mean, if there are concerts, I'm sure we'll have to think about how late they should and could end. But I think we have to balance that aspiration for something vibrant with the needs of the neighbours for a good night's sleep.
Where are people going to park?
They are going to do what they currently do, which is park in the park and ride and get buses and get on their bikes. We are not going to be able to provide significant additional parking. There will be a bit of obviously disabled parking. There'll be taxi drop off. There's an ability for coaches to drop off on the Woodstock Road. There's a coach parking space outside Green Templeton, but this is not a venue that you can drive to.
And your point of access to Woodstock Road, with or without that barrier outside the mass building, will that barrier go?
I don't know the answer to that question. I think it probably will need to be a managed barrier because there'll need to be some traffic management to make sure that bikes and traffic don't clash.
Now, you will know that one of the areas of discussion, shall we say, in Jericho at the moment is a low traffic neighbourhood and possibility of pedestrianising or not pedestrianising, barriers or not barriers. Do you hold a position on that at all?
I really don't think, John, it's for the university to hold a position. We're very aware that there's a lively discussion. Many of my colleagues, many university folks, including humanities folks, are also residents of Jericho, and they will have a variety of views about this. So I think it's clearly for the county council to make a determination about that.
Now, one of the thoughts is that you will have to pay Section 106 CIL, which will be a lot of money. And now the pedestrianisation people are about £500,000 short of money to pedestrianise. Can you help them out there?
We will be paying a very significant CIL levy because it will be proportionate to the size and scale of the building, but it's for the council to determine what to do with that levy. What's
the total cost of the whole project?
I really don't think I'm at liberty to disclose that, John. It's a very expensive project and we're still costing it, as you can imagine.
But you did have a rather substantial donation of 150 million.
We did, yes. We had a substantial donation, yes. And the university are matching some of that donation, but we don't know the total cost of the project. And I think that's as much as I can say about that.
So it could be well in excess of 200 million, maybe even 300 million.
We are working with our cost consultants to determine the cost of the building, but stone doesn't come cheap, let me say that straight away.
Now, your 150 million came from Mr. Schwartzman, who is an American billionaire who announced last week that he was the biggest private landlord in the world. I think he said he was in rental. There's been some discussion, shall we say, within the university and some of your academics about whether you should have taken that money. Are they right?
The university has arm's length, very thorough processes for reviewing proposed donations. There's a committee to review donations, which contains a number of experts in ethics, business, and the law. So that decision is always made at arm's length from the beneficiary. So Humanities as the beneficiary doesn't make that decision. we are satisfied that we made that decision according to our proper processes, and are very delighted to have been given this donation from someone who supports higher education in the US and elsewhere in the world.
I'm interested in the mechanics of that. How does that work? How do you find a passing billionaire to give you 150 million? How do you get into contact with him or him with you?
He was someone who the university had some previous contact with, and we made initial contact, and we took him to the top of the Radcliffe Observatory and showed him the site.
And at that point, he took his wallet out and said, here's 150 million.
No, but we also talked at great length about the importance of humanities in the world. So this is very much a project about the value of the humanities and the insights that humanities can bring in our global predicament, and the insights that humanities brings to democracy and civic culture. And as part of that discussion, and as part of this developing project, we have also decided to create a new institute for the ethics of artificial intelligence. So this has been an academic project thinking about the futures of humanities and the many ways in which all of our faculties are developing new insights in new interdisciplinary ways. But one new aspect to this is a new field of ethics, which is rather like the way that medical ethics developed 30, 40 years ago. It wasn't a field until then, and now it's a huge field, especially at the University of Oxford. So what need to be the ethical and governance frameworks and thinkings around artificial intelligence and advanced technology more generally. So that's already started. We've appointed a new director, and there will be space for that institute in the building.
So how big will that be, that department? And totally new faculty?
It's part of the philosophy faculty, because it's grounded in really rigorous thinking about ethics, just as medical ethics has to be. So it is part of the philosophy department, but it will have its own staff and its own identity. And we've appointed a number of academics already, and we'll be appointing more. We'll have doctoral students. We have some postdoctoral researchers already. And from a small base, we would like to grow it to be something really quite significant.
So will that be your signature academic department? That'll be what will get you the attention, the impact, do you think?
It will be a signature academic department, but we have Oxford Humanities is huge. We are the biggest grouping of humanities scholars in the world, and we have academics and students who do research and carry out activities in a huge range of signature areas, whether that's about the ethics of care in the medical system, or whether that's about China, or understanding the Middle East, or understanding the impact of the classical heritage on the modern world. So we couldn't ever say that we have one signature feature of what we do. We have huge impact in a whole variety of areas.
But this will be novel. This is
relatively new. Yes, this is. I mean, it's not unprecedented, because Oxford has been very innovative in this area already, and we already have in the social sciences a wonderful department called the Oxford Internet Institute, which looks in a very applied way at the global and social impacts of the internet and of digital technologies. And that institute is going to be part of the building. And this institute will sit alongside that social science perspective, so that we have a next door to the Blavatnik School of Government as well. So we're going to have a really rich, rounded way of looking at technologies in the global world today.
So at your peak, how many academics will you have in that building?
We have, the Humanities Division as a whole has around 660 academics. Most of them, if you remember, have offices in their colleges. So this is not about re-providing college offices and relocating academics in large numbers to the building. It's not going to be an office block building, but this building is for all of them. Some of them will have offices, administrative staff will have offices, and this building is for all of them to use for events, seminars, performances, interactions, and much more besides.
So there will be teaching spaces within it?
There will be teaching spaces, absolutely. Yep.
So
and a lecture theatre.
A lecture theatre, a concert hall, and there's also going to going to be a performance venue as well, isn't there?
Well, what we hope to have is a really nice venue for drama, a medium-sized venue for particularly student drama, but also public-facing dramatic performances. Much smaller than the Playhouse, but something at a medium size.
You don't see yourself competing with the Sheldonian and indeed the Playhouse or indeed St Barnabas as local venues?
I really hope not. We have had from the outset a lot of dialogue with cultural partners within the city. We are very serious about doing something distinctive, but not something that competes with the local cultural ecosystem. But we are in a part of the country that is growing in population terms. I don't believe that we've reached the ceiling of what we can add to the cultural landscape as we rebuild in the post-COVID environment. And I think we can help to make Oxford even more of a cultural destination city.
Dream on. If you can, 6 years' time, what will that little area of Jericho look like, do you think, on an evening and on a day? What's your dream?
Do you mean that the site?
The site and indeed Vavadnik and everything around it.
My dream is that of an evening, there's a wonderful concert going on. It's a fine summer's evening. We use digital technologies to light up the front of the building for a period, not going too late in the evening, but something really interesting. People are standing outside having a drink, alcoholic or non-alcoholic, and the warm lights from inside the building are shining out, welcoming people in.
And those people will be people from all over, from Jericho, from Woodstock, from North Oxford.
I would like that. And I would also very much like, perhaps not in the evening because it'd be past their bedtime, but I would really like to think that we have many more school children. We are going to include a dedicated space for school children, a schools engagement centre with a maker space so that we can engage in all kinds of activities, for example, with the Bodleian libraries. And I feel strongly, having built these kind of spaces myself before, that it's very important if you want young people to feel that higher education is for them, that Oxford is for them, that humanities is for them, that at a young age, they find themselves inside a space, they engage, they realise that I and my other academic colleagues are not too terrifying, that what we do is interesting, that they can learn a language that they never thought they could learn, that they can study history, that they can think about the world through the lens of humanities. So part of that, perhaps not the evening scenario, but the daytime scenario, is lots of quite young faces from, I would like to think, all over the country. And
so it'll be like aim higher used to be, will it? Is that the plan?
Well, I mean, everybody's learned a lot from Aim Higher and those kinds of outreach activities, and Oxford does its own extremely well. The colleges do their own very well, but we really want to augment that aspiration to reach young audiences at a young age.
Something that is a particular bugbear of mine. Any plans for Freud's, that lovely church, St Paul's Church? Is that part of your scheme somewhere?
It's privately owned. It is a lovely church. Very dear to me. We have to respect it as we design the site, but no, of course, we don't have plans for other people's buildings.
No, but should it come on the market, you might be interested in it, or your university might be interested in it to complete the
I'm not aware of any plans for that to happen.
He's quite old. Somebody asked a question from about the landscape, and they hope it's going to be nothing like the Westgate, which is horrible yellow bricks in the Westgate. What have you laid down to Gillespie in terms of how you want it to look?
Well, I think landscapes have to be appropriate to the site. Personally, having grown up in the city, I've been very impressed by the Westgate transformation. I like the planters on the roof of the Westgate, and I particularly like the way that the Westgate seems to draw young people in a really enjoyable way. But Gillespie's know, and we know, that is a completely different thing from a ground floor level site around an academic building that will have performance venues. And we certainly are planning to have a good deal more greenery, especially at the north end, but it's very much in development.
Now, in terms of local commercial involvement, will there be opportunities to franchise? Will there people be able to sell hot dogs, German sausages, and other things outside, or not?
I'm not sure I know the answer to that question, John. I don't see why not, but if I'm honest, I don't know what the answer is to that question.
Because if you've been in Little Clarendon Street Fair,
Yeah,
or indeed
there are. Yeah,
there are lots and lots of people around Oxford who run little enterprises who I'm sure would
there
love
are.
them, but you don't have any plans for them as yet.
Well, I think there's probably a wider point that we should make because, we are in the global moment that we're in, and we are all acutely conscious of the impact of COVID on employment in the city and beyond. And this is certainly a venue, and this is my aspiration for this venue, that will create employment for a larger number of people from the city. So that might be about a coffee cart or a more varied food offering in the vicinity, but it will also be about the people that work in the building. We in the Humanities division have been experimenting a bit with the apprenticeship scheme, the government apprenticeship scheme. I hope we do a huge amount more. Let's imagine technicians who are supporting the concert hall or the drama venues. So I very much hope that in the broader sense, this building is part of a positive contribution to the employment ecosystem of the city.
Now, you've got people like Philip Pullman and Neil McGregor and Tim Berners-Lee as endorsing you. Will I be able to come and see them and hear them in one of those venues?
We'd have to ask them, but I sincerely hope so. I sincerely hope so.
Because you run
they have contributed, they have interacted with, obviously Tim Berners-Lee is a professor of the university, he's at Christchurch College, but the other two have contributed to the university on many occasions, and it would be wonderful if that happened again.
Now, you already run a very active program, a newsletter called Torch, don't you? Perhaps people don't know about that. Can you tell them about that?
We have a very active program across the whole of Humanities, including the music faculty, which runs a very lively series of concerts. But one of the things that we do is we have a cross-cutting, cross-departmental entity called the Oxford Centre for Research in Humanities. For a number of years, it's been running a very active public-facing program, including a Book at Lunchtime program, which before the COVID crisis was very well attended by a very wide range of people. We have large numbers of public events, often around a kind of headline serious theme. We had a big event in the Sheldonian for the artist Jeff Koons. We had to go very suddenly online, like everybody else, and we described that online program as the Big Tent because we had planned last April to put up a big marquee on the site to do a bit of placemaking and to invite local residents to come and join us for a glass or a coffee and for a series of events that we were planning to hold on the site as a way of introducing, as I am to you today, the concept of this building to the neighbourhood. Now, we've not been able to do that. That was really, well, among many very sad things, a sad thing. So the Torch team very quickly reinvented the Big Tent as a virtual Big Tent. And throughout the lockdown, at the rate of one a week, produced a series of events, concerts, talks, debates, which you can find on the Torch website called the Big Tent Live. Rather like this event, we did it in the same way. There was a live conversation that was then streamed to YouTube. So you can see all of those events on YouTube. And we had fantastic attendance for those events. So I think we have found new audiences through this period of COVID. And as we think about the programming for the building, we need to think about how we keep and develop those audiences, both virtually and in person.
How do people find those events in order to attend them virtually?
We get incredibly, we get very positive feedback. Oh, yes, thank you. I'm seeing some aspects of the Torch website. Sorry, it sort of flashed on my screen. We get very, very positive feedback. I think especially at the height of the lockdown, people really, really appreciated having these events. And there was an ability to ask questions in the chat. So there's an interactivity that's very important to us. And we've had a very large, very appreciative audience and a very loyal audience. And what's been very heartening is that it's both a local audience and an audience from all over the world. So people who can't ordinarily engage with Oxford have been able to engage with us this way.
just because I'm nosy, what's the largest audience you've got for any online event?
I don't know the answer to that question, but it is definitely in the several thousands.
It's not in the minute. So people want to find out about those events, they go to the Torch website and get them on the Torch mailing list.
And you can see how many hits on YouTube. The YouTube will tell you the answer to that question, John.
Indeed. Finally, or nearly finally, so back to the dream. So in 2025, Jericho will have this new space. It'll be open to all of us. Bavanik will be there. Is it going to enhance the neighbourhood? Is it good for us?
I would be extremely disappointed if people didn't feel it was a really significant enhancement to the neighbourhood. We in this neighbourhood have been lacking a quickly accessible open green space in particular. You have to go all the way down to Port Meadow or across to University Parks. We have the Jericho Health Centre on the site. I would love to think that people would go to the doctor, come out, take a seat on the lawn, get a sandwich. So for me, some of it is about having that outdoor amenity space that is a bit lacking in that part of town. I think that will be a really significant enhancement. I think the sense that Oxford is connected horizontally as well as vertically will sort of change the way that we feel a bit about the city in our end of the city. And I also very much hope that families, residents will see the building as a resource for them to go to things, to engage with things, to have a drink in the cafe, to have a drink at the bar when there's a concert, to feel that the barriers that perhaps have historically been there between the university and the city are being lowered with every passing year.
My group's actually been into the observatory and up the tower. Are you going to try and persuade Green Templeton to maybe open that up a bit more to the public than it is currently?
I think that's for Green Templeton. It's a great privilege. I've been up there several times. There's it's a very tricky staircase, and even for able-bodied people, and and only a very small number of people can go up there safely at any one time. But it's a wonderful experience if you get that chance.
And if in a year's time we come back to you, you'll be maybe 6 months. You'll be in a position to show us the architectural delights of what you're planning, will you?
Yeah, well, as part of the consultation, we'll start to share those, especially also including views, and progressively we'll be able to share those. But clearly it's important that we don't share things that we think may change. So we need to have a degree of certainty. Okay,
I've done for now, unless you have any question, any messages for the good folk of Jericho.
I want to just thank everybody who engaged with the consultation. We had really good feedback. We have met with the Jericho Residents Association and the Walton Manor Residents Association, and we really value that feedback, early and frank, and we want to continue to hear from the neighbourhood about their aspirations for the building and any concerns that they may have. And we all understand that the earlier we have those discussions, the better.
Thank you very much. And now I'm just going to do a commercial for what's coming up after Christmas. I don't know if my friend Phil has any visuals at all. Oh, here it is. On Wednesday, 6th of January, Professor Jim Naismith, an Oxford academic who lives in Jericho, will talk about COVID. What else is there to talk about? He runs not the Roslin Institute. You'll correct me, won't you, Karen? Down in Harwell. And he is the go-to expert for COVID. On January the 13th, I don't know if we have a slide for that. We've got Mark Davis, local historian, talking about Jericho churches and canals. On the 20th, John Howson, 20th editor of local paper, doing his first appearance, Pete Gavin, and then the 27th, John Howson, who is not only a county council, but just written a book about European trains, about closely observed European trains. And so it goes on and on. You'll find them all on the myjericho.co.uk website. And thank you all. Karen, thank you very much indeed. And I'll see you in the cafe.